Hello, this video will look into the key components of nutrition and will explain at a high level how these components all work together when it comes to food and nutrition. So first of all, let's take a look at the macronutrients and our three energy sources, which are carbohydrates, protein, and fat. So our body needs those macronutrients to produce energy and function properly. So when we consume those macronutrients, they need to get converted first. So when we look at carbohydrates, which gives approximately 4 calories per gram, so that's our pasta, bread, rice, potatoes, fruits, and vegetables, they get converted to blood glucose, also known as blood glucose, also known as glucose. And if we look at protein, that's our fish, our meat, dairy, the beans, and the legumes, which have about 4 calories per gram as well. They get converted via the liver to amino acids. And the last macronutrient, fat, where we have different types of like saturated, unsaturated fats, which have 9 calories per gram, they get converted to fatty acids. So now let's look into our two main energy stores in our body, which are the muscles and the fat stores. And how does these two work and get used? So when we consume carbohydrates, which are our main primary source of energy, but we do not need them straight away because let's say we're inactive, just reading a book or sitting in front of the computer, but we need to store the sugar in our blood somewhere, and that's in our muscles. So we have a hormone called insulin, which allows us to reduce the sugar in our blood and transport the sugar to the muscles and liver where it's stored in form of glycogen. So that's the stored version of glucose. So now let's look at the situation when you wake up in the morning and you start having your breakfast, which is high in carbohydrates. So it's like your toast, your cereals, your orange juice. There's nothing particularly wrong with these food. It's just that they are high in carbs. And as you go through the day, you eat more carbohydrates. You have your potatoes, your low-fat muffin for a snack, and then some curry and rice. And at some stage, your storage is full. Because our muscle storage is very small, it's about half a kilogram. And when it becomes full and we still consume more, then we can actually store, the body needs to store it somewhere else. And then when it gets converted into fat and stored in our fat store. So this is an important thing to know as you eat many carbs that that cannot be stored in our muscles. So when it comes to fat loss, it's not always about the amount of calories that you actually consume, but rather understand the macronutrients that you consume and the amount of each and the balance between them. So let's look at a second hormone, which is glucagon. So glucagon, it's not as well known as insulin, but it actually does the opposite to insulin. So let's look at the situation where you, for example, have to run for a bus or run for the train. Usually our body reconverts those glycogen stores in our muscles to produce blood sugar for energy. So it uses insulin for that. And the issue here is that, we can also use glucagon to produce energy for our body by using fat as an energy source rather than carbs. Because glucagon is our fat burning friend, and we want to turn that on to work for us to use fat for fuel. But there's a problem. The problem here is insulin. Glucagon and insulin, they do not work together. So if insulin is present in your bloodstream, glucagon can't be released. So if we have a high level of insulin by consuming too many carbs, we are limited by using the glucagon. So and that's a real challenge. How we are able to leverage the fat store more efficient. So one of the strategies we can look at is to control the carbs that we consume, to regulate the insulin in order to promote fat burning. So now let's look at the next macronutrient, which is protein, in a bit more detail. So protein is a very important macro because it's used for muscle growth and repair and to protect our muscles. So also when we have enough protein in our body, it can help boosting our metabolism. And because what it does to it helps us to kind of like stay fuller for longer, and it helps to also control the other like feel good hormones in our body and suppresses the hunger hormone. And so it's a very important role. It has a very important role in terms of growth and repair and having a high metabolism. So I mean, there is one problem, however. You know, so far it sounded great, but the problem is we have a really resistance to use fat. So it's actually very tricky for us to use fat as an energy. The reason why we have this is evolution based. It's not that long ago that we didn't have such great access to food and fat. So, you know, back in the days we had to work hard to hunt and fight, you know, in order to get enough fat. So our body has kind of developed a protection mechanism to protect its fat stores. So it would rather use its muscle mass than accessing our own fat resources. It's purely as a survival and protection mechanism. So, well, not quite what we want. So one of the two things we need to make sure our body does not go into such a survival and protection mode is to understand the two key types of fats. So we know there are fats that get stored directly as fat, which we don't want. But there's also a second type that gets converted into so-called essential fatty acids. And as the name implies, they are essential for us, for our body to work and function properly. And we need to provide them from outside, from our food. So these are in particular our omega-3 fatty acids, and it's very common to see in Western diets that we are very short on omega-3 fats. So we need to make sure to provide our body with good sources of omega-3 fatty acids through our diet. So sources like fish oils, and nuts and seeds, and certainly avocados, they are all good sources of omega-3s, and there are also like good supplements out there to provide those omega-3 needs. So the second strategy would be to eat fat to lose fat, and if in doubt, also consider omega-3 supplement to help out. We also just said before that we need plenty of protein to control our hunger hormone, the ghrelin, to preserve muscle mass. So, and again, if in doubt, supplement is such as protein powder can be considered here as well. So if we continue, we also need to look into our into our micronutrients, which are our vitamins and our minerals, and of course water. So if we can make sure that we got enough of them coming in and enough water, we can optimize the body chemical reaction to also protect the metabolic rate. So our fourth key strategy here is to consume plenty of water every day, plus fruit and vegetables, to speed up the chemical reactions in our body. And you might also want to consider a multivitamin here. With fruits, because we try to convince our body to use fats, and fruits they are high in carbohydrates and sugar. We want to stay on the lighter side at the beginning, to kickstart that process. So we just need to stay conscious of the amount of carbohydrates that we consume to kickstart the process. And the last key strategy we need to consider in order to boost our metabolism. So the last key strategy that we need to consider in order to boost our metabolism is resistance training and hard cardio interval training. So when we look at the total daily energy and calorie expenditure and the actual amount we burn each day, we can see that the BMR, the basal metabolic rate, plays by far the biggest part. It makes up about 70% of the total energy expenditure. The rest, it's 15% exercise, so that includes all structured bouts of activities and also the food. The food has also a thermic effect when we digest it, and it produces energy. But the key factors that affect, our metabolic rate is first of all our lean body mass, like the active muscle tissues in our body. So that doesn't mean that someone needs to bulk up or gain massive amount of muscles. It's rather that we make sure that we are using what we have on a regular basis. So regular exercise regime will allow us to break down muscle tissues by lifting heavy weights, which then gets rebuilt in the rest period, which again produces energy by the body, and that will increase our metabolism. So the same goes with high intensity interval training, which creates a nice afterburn sensation even a long time after the exercise is finished. So we can, burn fat while we're sleeping or being inactive. Last but not least, long-lasting aerobic cardio exercises, such as running, biking, or swimming at a low intensity will also contribute to burn fat and help our body to become a more fat-burning machine, if you want, by using our energy sources in a more effective way in the long term. I'm hoping this video was informative and gave you a little insight into how these components all work together, and hopefully you can use that information moving forward to use it more effectively. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.